What's up, guys? On this edition of Hotel Ford, we're digging into a EVAP system issue on the old 1997 Crown Victoria. So, what I had going on, well, actually, the symptoms and the problem that we had to start with was my wife came home one day and said, "Babe, the car stalled when I stopped." And I was like, "Uh-oh. That's not good. Probably don't like that." And she said that it was running a little weird. It did fine on the highway, but when she was cruising around in town closer to idle, it was all stumbly and didn't feel very good. And then when she came to a stop at a light, it just stalled. So it sounded to me like we had developed a vacuum leak somewhere, somehow. Not thought it possible in all the vacuum lines on this thing. But anyway, so the first thing I did is I assumed we may have a vacuum leak. So I started checking around on all my old vacuum lines everywhere to make sure nobody was broke open. And then I got a vacuum gauge out. Yep, see, here's my little cheap auto parts store vacuum gauge. But I pulled him out and I used a tube. This is another fitting on it right now. But I used a tube and I hooked up to a couple things. Like we have a lot of diaphragm fittings, modular devices everywhere. Like our fuel pressure regulator here, he's got a diaphragm in him, so I checked that one, and it held vacuum nice and wasn't pulling fuel through. That's always a good sign. Those are bad. If you ever pull that off and gas comes out, that's not good. And the EGR, he passed the test, and there was like a few other ones, but when I came over to this is the EVAP system purge valve, when I came over to him, he's got a big diaphragm back here. It did not pass the test. It was blown out, and the vacuum signal source, see, I have it separated and it's capped off. The engine vacuum being hooked into that guy, ready for the valve to be open or closed, it was just leaking to atmosphere. So the engine had a vacuum leak through the EVAP purge valve diaphragm. And anyway, so, you know, naturally I did the right thing. I just capped the vacuum leak and let her keep driving it. But as it turns out, you probably shouldn't do that. Because I had capped the line off and I left the guy plugged in, and that tricked the car's computer into thinking that valve was operational when it's not, and it was signaling for it to turn on. And how I believe the system works anyway, whenever you're in the right conditions for the car's computer to want to suck fuel vapor out of the canister, that's what the EVAP system does, by the way. It's all about the gasoline fumes in your tank back there. Because you don't want your tank to be sealed. That'd be bad. Then you'd pull a vacuum on it and the fuel system wouldn't work. It has to be vented. With the we gotta let fuel vapors out of the tank, and we gotta let air back in the tank. Like as the fuel level goes down, you need air to go back in the tank to replace the space the fuel was in. Otherwise, you'll pull a vacuum. And likewise, the other way, when you're sitting out in the sunlight, the gasoline vapors and stuff in there are going to build up. As heat builds up, that pressure has to go somewhere. You don't want vacuum or pressure inside the fuel tank. That's not good. So that's what the whole EVAP system does. See, you can see through the hole in our bumper. There's a charcoal canister right here from another car. I should probably replace that at some point too. But there's a charcoal canister here that the vent lines from the fuel tank come up to that guy. There's a valve on there called a vent valve. This is just our system. There's variations quite a bit. But there's a vent valve on him, and there's sealed lines that runs from him up over here to this valve, and then another sealed line that runs over to the intake. So what happens is whenever that valve turns on, And the whole vacuum diaphragm here, his whole operation is he's used to open and close the airway between the pipe going to the canister and the pipe coming off your intake. The pipe coming off your intake has a vacuum on it all the time because the intake's sucking. So it's constantly pulling on the other side of this, ready to suck the vapors in anytime that this thing opens. All this diaphragm does, this thing that we supply vacuum to from that little line, all he does is the diaphragm has a little nipple on it that keeps the airway closed between that pipe and the one to the intake. And whenever this thing turns on, it applies the engine vacuum to this side of that diaphragm, pulls them this way, and that opens up that airway to let the intake suck air through that charcoal canister whenever the car decides the conditions are correct, like it has excess vapor and the engine's in the right condition, you're not under load, and all the parameters. You know what I mean? So anyway, me having the car thinking that this valve is operational, what I believe I accidentally had happening was the car would sense the conditions, it would try to purge the tank and dump it into the intake. And in preparing for that, because it's getting all this fuel vapor in the intake, I believe it would dial the fuel trims back to accommodate. So it was doing that, getting ready for the fuel vapor to come from the tank that it never got. So I'm pretty sure what was happening is she was running a little lean every time the car tried to cycle the purge valve. So what I did now is I unplugged it. That way it threw the code for it, it knows it's not working, and it's doing something else now. But it's not stuttering like it was, because when I had that plugged in, I noticed while we were driving down the highway, everything was smooth and good, no vacuum leak, it felt great, but every once in a while, mainly while we were cruising under very light throttle, the whole motor would start stuttering. And I think that might have been it trying to do the purge valve function and it dialing the fuel trims back and the motor suddenly going lean. So anyway, don't do that. So now we've actually found the correct part to replace this guy, and I can hook the vacuum and the thing back up and clear the code, and it can do its things. And here we are, plugged into the old OBD2. I got my finger over the light here because it really blinds you guys. But here's the code that we get for unplugging the purge valve. P0443. Yeah, so me having the purge valve unplugged and the car having that code, I think it has it where we could drive the car until we could get the correct part in to rectify this situation. Because what I believe is going on while we have that code set is the system is ignoring that purge valve and it's purging the excess fuel vapor pressure in the tank out the vent valve, which isn't great. Because if I am correct about that, that would mean that the car is, pooping out flammable fuel vapor, probably out of there, out the front of the car, and that's a hazard. So definitely don't recommend that you hack this system one way or the other. You should definitely have an operational purge valve all the time. Otherwise, maybe just don't drive. What if somebody smoked a cigarette next to it and then Alright. Now that we got our new EVAP purge valve to go in over there, she's a Duralast PV227 variety. If you go to the Auto Zone, get in the zone. If you care to get in the zone. So now what we got to do is there's two nuts here that hold this guy in place. These EVAP lines over here, the ones that go into the intake and from the fuel tank, those are a little on the fragile side. So you got to be careful with them, but it's pretty easy. Little boop, push the tabs in, they slide off. So on and so forth. Let's swap it out. Alright. Now we're mounted back up. I got our vent lines back on and the electrical connection. Now all we got to do, my vacuum line had broken it off when I was testing on all this at the beginning. So I just have to repair it again. You see I already did it once. You can take these two tubes and take the cap off of this one, of course. And then we can line those up next to each other and slide a piece of heat shrink over the top of them and shrink it down, and she'll be vacuum tight again. Yeah. Alright. Now I got my vacuum line reattached here, and I don't like how this brake is like right here and there's only this little bit of heat shrink holding him on. So I'm going to put another piece of heat shrink over it. Double the protection. Eventually I should just put a whole new vacuum line here. He's not that long, but you know what I mean. It's getting late. There we go. Now we got a little more material over the brake there. Yeah. Probably work forever, maybe. Next, we can go get our scan toolulator and plug in and clear the code. And we should be back in operation, purgulating our, what are they? Gas tank fumes back down the app. Well, while I was figuring out our other EVAP system issues, we still had a blockage in the system type of situation. I found out that our canister that lived right behind the big open hole in the bumper, it was full of rainwater somehow. So I fixed that. It's not very pretty, but it does look a little better than a big hole in the bumper. And now when we wash the car and drive through the rain, it shouldn't just right on top of the charcoal canister too bad. It does seem to be much happier with us with all those systems functioning properly again. Runs smoother and seems to have a little better low-end power throttle response and all that. Yeah. And it's got the coolest little battle scar rivet repair tech screw. Those are license plates. They always are. It's pretty much stronger than before. Great. Anyway, thanks for watching. Comment, like, subscribe, and all that YouTube stuff that we do. Internet age. Woohoo! Y'all have a good one. We'll see you next time.